So just a reminder, we are recording this, which I think might be news to a few folks, but we're really looking forward to the discussion tonight. I am Dan Petty. I'm the president of the Denver Press Club, and we're really excited to be presenting this panel on media diversity and being a Black journalist in Colorado. We've got a lot of really accomplished journalists in the room. We're waiting for one more, Justin Adams from CBS 4's sports department to join us, but I think he's just getting off the air. As a reminder, the Denver Press Club is a 501c3 nonprofit that hosts panel discussions like this about issues in the media. When we are not shut down by coronavirus, we have a great historic building in downtown Denver, where you can come and enjoy a drink. And of course, ideally in person, enjoy these discussions, meet, connect with people, talk. We are closed right now because of the pandemic. Hopefully we get this thing under control soon and we can all be back together soon enough. But in the meantime, we're doing stuff like this. The best way that you can support us is by becoming a member. The regular rate is $275 for individuals, but if you're a journalist or retired, the rate is $150. And because we're virtual, we of course reach people from across the country as well. So there's also a $60 non-resident rate. And again, that goes toward helping us support programs like this, making it free for folks to enjoy. And like I said, the goal tonight is to discuss media diversity and the challenges we still face as a news industry and some of the personal stories that our journalists here have experienced. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Greg Moore. Greg is the editor-in-chief of Deke Digital, which is a digital agency focused on content by experts who write op-eds, lots of big important names that you know of and have probably read in prominent publications. And Greg and I are former colleagues because he was the longtime editor of the Denver Post. So Greg, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Do you want to introduce our two guests, make sure everybody knows where
Sure.
they are? Okay.
Yeah. Micah Smith, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Hey, good. Hi, everybody. I was going to say good morning. Wow. My name is Micah Smith, and I am a morning reporter for Denver 7. I've been with Denver 7 now for a little bit over a year and a half. I've been in the TV business for about 7 years, a little bit longer. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I graduated from Mizzou with a bachelor's of journalism. I've lived all over the country, but I really enjoy living here in Denver and telling stories.
Thanks, Micah. Tori, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Tori Mason, and I'm a reporter at CBS 4. You used to be able to find me in the mornings with Micah, but now I'm on the 5 and 6 p.m. shows. Prior to this, I was in Topeka, Kansas, and then before that, I was a sports reporter in Baton Rouge. I am originally from Orlando, Florida, but I say go Tigers. I went to LSU, and I'm really excited to be here in Denver. This is my third year going into reporting in Denver.
Great. Well, really great to have this opportunity to be with you guys and really talk about this issue, which I think is really important, particularly now that we're in the period that's, I guess, become known as the reckoning. That's the post George Floyd era that we're living in right now, where symbols and policies and practices that, have an impact on sort of racial equity have really come to the fore. And it's not just police or, institutions of higher learning or financial institutions that have been coming under scrutiny. It's also, the media. And so I think the timing on this is really good. Don't want to put anybody on the spot or anything like this, but I do think we have a platform here and we ought to really use it to sort of get to the nitty gritty about some things. So let's act like we're at a dinner party and we're just sort of talking among ourselves. Let's share. Let's start here. Can you guys talk a little bit about what it's like being a person of color in the newsroom today, with all the things that are happening with the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and the whole, sort of race-conscious discussion that's taking place in America? Are you being asked to do more, or are you being, are you being given more stories? Are you offering more story ideas? Are you being asked to shape coverage, or what? What are the demands like for you as a person of color in a newsroom today?
I'm not sure who wants to go first.
You can go ahead, Tori.
Well, yeah, like, something like majorly race related has, been a leading spot in our newscasts for several months now, and that's not typically the case. Not to mention COVID-19, that's been killing like a disproportionate number of African Americans. And Black people in these communities, not just in Denver, but all over the country, want their voices heard. But there's a very small number of Black people in newsrooms who are willing to fight to get those stories on the air. While they all might be great stories, everyone in the room might not think that they're newsworthy that day, or even be Block worthy if you're news speaky. I don't know. It's kind of strange right now because I'm getting a lot of latitude. I'm able to do a lot more stories that I know I wouldn't have been able to do in the past because they're more relevant right now. But at the same time, I'm grateful. It's all about timing, I guess.
Micah?
I would say it's been tough and it's been exhausting, but it's also been extremely rewarding. Same as what Tori said, I've been able to do so many more stories of these kind that I never would have been able to do before. And that part has been extremely rewarding, and I haven't had to fight as hard, even when it comes to the amount of time I want to give a story. I think it's natural for our experiences as minorities in this country to evoke emotion when we're covering these stories. And so I would say, a challenge for me has been, how do I tell this story and give a voice to somebody without putting my voice in it, but also lend my experience to it so that it is powerful and people understand. So I will say, I think that my station, while they've given me a little bit of extra work, I've also put more work on myself because these issues are so important to me personally and so important to the community.
And I think Justin has joined us. We'll give him a chance to sort of get set up and find his right picture. Just to follow up on what you two just said about latitude and exposure, do you feel like this is going to carry on? That somehow you've been able to sort of emerge as a more valuable voice, a more valuable contributor to your news operations? And do you see this carrying over post-pandemic, 2-3 years down the road?
I've never not felt like I had a valuable voice in my newsroom, but do I think this will carry on? No, because it never really has before. This isn't the first time this has been a lead story. Right now, it's just one of those times where it's lit to be woke.
That's really interesting, because a lot of people are sort of saying that they think that this moment is transcendent, but you don't necessarily feel that way.
I mean, this isn't the first time a Black man has died at the hands of police. I mean, sure, like more people are getting involved with it and being more vocal about it, but will it last long? I mean, I can't say for sure, but just based on the past 400 years.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Micah, what about you?
I think it can, and I think in order for it to carry over for years to come, we have to fight for it. It's not something that our newsroom is ever going to naturally gravitate toward, these types of stories. I think that we as Black journalists have to come to the conclusion that it's going to be a fight when it's no longer in the headlines. We won't have as much latitude. And I think that we have to continue to enforce that it's not enough to show up to communities or people of color and want to tell their stories after the fact. People ask all the time, well, how do you get this exclusive? How do you get this? How do you get that? It's like, because I was there when there was, just a simple community event going on. I didn't just show up at the shooting. Why do they only want to talk to you? Why do they only want to talk to her? It's like, well, I go to church with this person and I've been there, so it's important to enforce the fact that we have to continue to be there if we want to be on the forefront of these stories.
Hi, Justin.
Guys, I just got to apologize. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, this is what happens when we report.
We're just happy. We're just happy that you're here. Tori, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going off of what Micah was saying. But at the same time, there have to be Black journalists in the newsroom to keep that going. But
right.
Show me some.
Well, let me just ask another question from the other side, because I think it's important for our audience to sort of know. So when you're out there on stories, what kind of reaction are you getting from these communities? Are they like, wow, we're really glad that you're out here, like it's about time this story got told? Well, like, what is it like for the audience, for the people that you're covering, to sort of see their stories being told in a way that perhaps maybe hasn't always been possible? Well, what kind of reaction are you getting when you show up on the scene?
It's interesting you bring that up because Micah, myself, and Zora Stevenson, who used to work at Fox 31 here, and Michaelia White, who also works at Channel 4, we were on this panel for a Black woman empowerment type of event last year. And there was a woman who came up to us, and she really came down on us for not being there, for not being everywhere that she thought that we needed to be in the Black community to tell these stories. But at the same time, we're like checking our emails. We're like, did you know about that? Because not everyone tells us what's going on. I mean, I'm not out in Green Valley Ranch every day. That's where the event was. I mean, I know what's happening in 5 Points, where I'm just beginning to make a lot of friends. But at the same time, I just moved to Denver 3 years ago. I'm still trying to figure out who my contacts are. And that's what I'm struggling with right now. I don't know every Black person in the metro area.
Sure.
And I don't get a lot of news tips from people of color, to be honest. I have to find them myself by being out there.
That's important to get out there. Is people need to understand that there are avenues for them to get their stories told, and they need to take advantage of that. So that's an important thing to sort of put out there. Anybody else want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, let me add something too. As a local here in Denver, growing up here, I know a lot of the feeling that many people do have towards just news in general. Growing up at Montbello High School, I knew that the news would come out for shootings, generally at Falcon Park. It was once a year. You knew something was going to happen. And the majority of what you saw was going to be negative that happened to you, or not happened to you per se, but that was being talked about your community. Even to the point where there's a reason why Montbello High School was renamed to Far Northeast, because Montbello has been disdained that much. And so that's one reason why people feel like they can't trust the media. They always think that there's always a negative tone, something negative that has to be told about the Black community in particular. And it's important for us to initially gain the trust. I think one thing that I've learned is that you have to earn the right to be heard. And many times we understand that, yes, we have the platform of telling stories, but at the same time, it is important for us to be able to go into the communities and let people know that, hey, we're here to help. We're here to tell your story. But at the same time, we're not going to lie. We're not here to beautify something that's a stench or something that's incorrect. That's not our job. So to let people know that, the women that we have here, like amazing journalists, and I look up to Tori, I look up to Micah, and to be able to say, hey, you could trust these individuals who are doing great work, as myself doing work in sports or different things as well. It's important that the community reaches out to us and not sees us as an evil. We are not that. We are tell stories and tell your story as well.
We're really glad that you're on this panel and that you're able to join us, because sports has been a huge part of this whole reckoning, from taking a knee and the Colin Kaepernick story, and what the white owners, how they view this. So that's a huge part of this cultural moment. I wonder if each one of you could just take a minute and maybe reflect on a story that you're most proud of, that you were able to do, that maybe wouldn't have been done if you were not sort of, out there reporting. Can you reflect on something that you think was a unique contribution from your reportage? Anybody can go first. So Justin, why don't you go first?
Okay. I did a story on how to speak to your child about racism, and I did it with Dr. Rosemary Allen. And what that taught me in that story was, initially, all I looked at for that story was I saw her on 9 News, to be very honest, and I was like, wait, I know this contact, I know this person, so wait a minute, she needs to be on our station. And it explains so much about color blindness and how that happened. How can something like that be around in society in general, where you clearly see my black face, you clearly see my black skin. Dan, I see your white skin. Like, you clearly see these different things. How is this something that permeated through society? And so to go through that story was not only eye-opening to me, but it was eye-opening to other individuals who read the story. They were like, wow, I didn't realize about that. To know that, you know, as Black and brown communities, generally, we are aligned with people who don't look like us from the get-go. So we never have the option of color blindness. We just understand, oh, this is white, this is Black, this is, you know, my Latin community, my Asian community, and we go forward with that. And when you understand that a kid can literally grow up, say 5 years old, 8 years old, and not interact, not per se not see, but to interact with somebody who doesn't look like them, definitely affects them from their infancy to where they are as adults. And so it was great to be able to look at that and to be able to make the contribution to the story, and also to just everything in general as well.
That's great. Micah?
I did a story about activism then and now, and I really, really enjoyed that story because I got to sit down with 8 young activists who have been at every Black Lives Matter protest. They've been organizing their own things, and I just thought it was a really cool story because I also talked to Reverend James Peters, who was very close with Dr. King, and, you know, very much a civil rights activist and icon in his own right. What I particularly loved, the part that kind of hooked me, I was expecting, with my preconceived notions, Dr. Peters to, you know, really come down hard on the activists today, and he did not at all. He said, oh, I'm proud of them. They're doing fabulous work. This is more than I could ever dreamed of in my lifetime. And I just kind of said, hey, Dr. Peters, what about all these people who say, oh, Dr. King would be ashamed, this and that? And he's like, absolutely not. He's like, I can't speak for Dr. King, but Dr. Peters is proud. But it was just really cool to just, you know, show then, show now, show that these young activists aren't just holding BLM signs, they're going back to their communities, they're holding food drives, they're doing all of these things in their communities that they're not getting credit for. So to shine a light on them, I thought was a really cool thing.
That's excellent. Tori?
I guess it would have to be my Walmart story, but, you know, I hate to pick that because a lot of the times I just don't feel like that story belongs to me because, you know, I'm not the first journalist to report on, you know, stores locking up brands meant for people of color. You know, it's just, I just happened to do it at the right time. And I wanted to do that story like almost 1.5 years ago. A woman had sent in pictures about it, but she didn't want to speak on camera. It just never really went anywhere. And what's interesting is I actually shot that story 2 weeks before it aired, you know, when the protests were really starting to get kind of violent. And I pushed my producers to not air it, you know, that initial Friday, because I just didn't want it to get lost in all the violence, which was done mostly by opportunists. You know, so we saved it for 2 weeks later when people were making, you know, productive pleas for change.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, like, Walmart's like, okay, we'll stop. But for years before that, nothing. It's just something we do to prevent theft. Like, a woman took Walmart to court over this.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're like, all right, we'll stop. And then CVS stopped, and then Walgreens stopped. And I don't want to take the credit for that because, I mean, people have done this story a lot. I just got really lucky on the timing, and to be a Black reporter right now, it's kind of a good time to get stuff done.
Well, but you know, one of the interesting things is that a lot of the issues that have been coming up in the last, you know, month or two, they're not new. You know, complaints about Confederate statues and police chokeholds and things like that have been talked about and written about for a long time. But timing is everything, right? And this time, it resonates in a completely different way. We're gonna be taking some questions from the audience. I did see something popped up on the chat asking whether you all could post links to the stories you just cited. If people would like to see those stories, that'd be really great to maybe
I can dig
post
those
them.
up and yeah, I can dig those up and drop them in the chat.
That'd
So
be great.
yeah.
So, this whole idea about doing this forum kind of started because, journalists of color were complaining about the lack of diversity in the media today. That at a time when these issues are sort of front and center and people are really demanding that these issues be dealt with, the sort of dearth of reporters of color at, newspapers, and particularly some of these new digital verticals that have been popping up. I actually did an interview with a woman at the Washington Post, and we were talking about this, and I described it as the whitening of the media, which seemed to, catch on and gain a little traction. I just wonder, what do you think about the issue overall when it comes to diversity, especially with these new players coming in, these digital players? What do you think about that? How do you feel about it? And when you're talking to your friends, what do you say?
Are you asking why there aren't many people?
I'm asking, what do you think about it?
I think it makes sense because, okay, so a lot of families of color can't afford to send their children to college, let alone journalism school, where they're not going to make any of their money back. I mean, honestly, my parents still have to help me out sometimes. It's not it's a privileged. It's hard to say that, but it is kind of a privileged career to go into. Okay. And I'm used to usually being the only Black person in the room. I would like that to change, but it's not always up to the individual who wants to do journalism. And and it's the low cost of, it's the low salaries, it's the money it goes into buying clothes and to moving, and there's so much behind it that you don't realize.
Okay. Micah?
I'm gonna go a different direction. When it comes to new media, and I don't want to be a downer here, I'm seeing way more representation in new media, especially on digital. But for us, there's a fine line between activism and journalism. And what I'm seeing is activist journalism, which I didn't know was even a thing, And so where I feel caught in between, and maybe Justin and Tori feel the same, is you have these people who are, who have started blogs or who have a little more leeway at NBC Black to say things and do things, giving their opinion that I don't have. And so here in the local community, it's like, why aren't you on the Sean King level? Why aren't you doing this and doing that? And it's like, hey, that's not journalism for me. That's not how I practice journalism. So it's made tougher. Would I like to see representation increase in TV and in all of the sequences? Of course, I would love to see representation increase, but I think it's harder because we're entering a new age of journalism, and where we're seeing representation increase, the line is becoming blurred.
Well, yeah, those are like predominantly, Black journalism, news sites or news, there's Black news out of Tallahassee that just started. But NBC Black, it can be slanted sometimes.
Right.
And you saw what happened to Black Sports Online, which I never really thought was journalism. But
yeah, I think the new things we see come out, it makes it really, really tough for us to be a local news reporter, just trying to be as balanced and objective and fair as we can when people can go elsewhere.
Justin?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear everyone's perspective, because in sports, today the Broncos had, a webinar, and they had their interviews with Von Miller, Cortland Sutton, and Vic Fangio, and I was the only Black face on there. Actually, I was the only face of color that was on there, and that's not something that's out of the ordinary. Here in Colorado, we're a little different in the sense of The Athletic has a Black woman covering the Kendra Andrews. She covers the Denver Nuggets. And then you have the Colorado Avalanche, of all people, with the Black reporter as well. Brian Clark, who does a tremendous job covering the teams. But after that, when you look at a local TV, even a radio standpoint, sports talk radio, I don't want to toot my own horn in this way, but I was the only sports talk host, the only African-American sports talk host to have his own show at Blue 760 last year. And on a local level, I'm the only sports anchor period. Chris Dempsey does work at Altitude Sports and Entertainment, but that's a regional sports network. So when you're looking at the stories that are missed, and there are so many stories that are missed because you look at the NFL, for example, 70% are black athletes, and yet they're being covered by white reporters. Nothing wrong with having white reporters out there, but what you're missing is stories of how about your family. I think one that stands out to me is, for example, Adam Jones, where he talked about how, we all know about his theatrics and different things that he did in the past to get in trouble with the law. But he went on a podcast and talked about how I grew up in a neighborhood where there was really nothing there, in a impoverished neighborhood. And so in many respects, I was acting out with all this money. Well, this is something that as a black man, I identify with. And so it's, you miss out on stories. And that's the biggest thing about it. When you don't have diversity, when you don't have diverse thought, you really miss out on stories all the way around. And so that's the truly frustrating part about it, is that you're missing out.
One of the things that I just know to be true after having a 40-year career in journalism is that, during economic downturns, I mean, the first thing that goes is diversity. Like I just read a report today that said 11,000 journalism jobs have been lost just since the pandemic. And you just know that, a lot of people of color who were the last hired are the ones that end up, on an unemployment line. And so it's very difficult to maintain and have diversity, especially in bad times. But I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about if there was one thing that you would recommend to, people who might be listening to this, that they could do to sort of, protect diversity or promote diversity, at their news outlets. What would that be? Just one thing, one idea.
Demand it. Emails, phone calls, demand it. But what people have to understand with the coronavirus is it takes away a lot of different things immediately. For example, in sports, we used to be able to go into the locker rooms. You could build those relationships with the players in the locker rooms and be able to talk to them. Then you have your own story that's different from every other outlet. Nowadays, because of Zoom, everybody has the same story. Everybody has the same soundbite. You don't have anything different. So it's that much more important to demand for, hey, let's have something more. Let's have an individual to be able to connect with a player or connect with the athlete in different ways now more than ever before, because it's going to look like the same thing in every outlet, especially on a local level. And many people, if we could be very honest, could just think that sports in Denver is being covered up by the umbrella of ESPN anyway. So what's the emphasis that we need in sports? There's a high importance of having local sports, local journalism, because not everything is being covered by the national umbrella.
Okay. Micah, what would you suggest to achieve more diversity?
While, trying to increase diversity, I would also suggest truly practicing inclusion and don't just hire somebody because they check off a box and they fulfill this, we need a person of color, we need a person of this orientation. Hire them with the intent of practicing inclusion. So when they tell you, hey, Juneteenth is a big deal, y'all, we did one little snippet on it, but it's a big deal, we need to do it. Instead of looking like, oh, we've never really covered that before, look at it like, hey, I hired this person for their voice, let's use it. So while we're trying to increase diversity, let's truly practice inclusion.
Tori?
Do you mean increasing diversity in the things that we cover, or in our newsroom itself?
Presence in the newsroom, reporters, editors, people that make decisions that influence how stories are covered. What do you think could be done to achieve that?
I mean, I think having Black managers is a really big deal, but if there are very few Black reporters, there are even less Black news directors, even fewer Black editors in chief. It's just something that people can relate to when they're to your station. It's someone they feel like they can trust. I mean, I know that's not realistic to be able to hire all of these managers at a time, but if even like a mentorship program, like to show people around, like introduce them to things like, oh, this is where, like, here's the beauty supply store, here's where you can go.
Right.
That would be very helpful and very inviting.
So I'm looking here on the chat, Dan. Can I just ask a couple of the questions that are on there?
Go for it.
So people want to know what inspired each of you to go into the news business or in TV. They want to know your personal story briefly. Micah?
I'll go first. Y'all, I wanted to be famous. I wanted to just live my best celebrity life. And honestly, in high school, we had our own TV station. We had our high school station and a district-wide station. And I started working at the high school TV station doing just, little fun stories about an ice cream shop opening or whatever. And that inspired me to go to Mizzou for journalism. And Mizzou kicked my butt the first few years. It kicked my butt. But what inspired me to keep going, I always say I did not go into journalism with noble intention at all, but it transformed into a very noble intention, in my opinion, to where I started seeing how journalism can truly impact people and how a visual medium is especially powerful. And that's what hooked me. That's what really hooked me.
Okay, Tori?
Mine's more of a personal thing. I've always had extreme anxiety. You can't see my hands right now, but they're shaking. It was so bad. I mean, I got taken out of school in 4th grade and was homeschooled for 5 years. I could not be around people, kids, nothing. Couldn't talk in front of people. That's why I was like, this is live. I was freaked out. And but every day when I would wake up before, being homeschooled by my mother, I would watch the Today Show. And the women on the show would just be so full of life, and it would feel like they were talking to me. It was one of the first times I felt like I had friends. And I wanted to be able to do that for somebody. And the connection that they made with me was something I wanted to give to somebody for the rest of my life, because I know how it feels to be alone and not listened to. And so I went into news. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but I feel like I get to talk to a lot of people every day without actually having to talk in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, no jitters. I'm only in front of one person and a camera, but, who knows how many people my story might impact.
That's really great. Well, we're glad you're doing it, and I can't tell. And I've sat next to you before. I've never seen that, so.
Oh, you saw it.
No. So, Justin, there's a question for you about, in covering the Broncos, do you feel a responsibility, and maybe you can see the question, about discussing the CTE epidemic and particularly its impact on players, given the composition of the NFL, obviously the impact is disproportionate for Black players. You feel a responsibility to cover issues like that?
100%. See, people have to understand that everybody thinks that once you get into the NFL, you're a millionaire. And that's false. There's only a couple of individuals who are truly millionaires out there. It's a fraction of the players out there who are millionaires. And so that's one. The other part too is I played football at the University of Colorado. So I get CTE, I get the head injuries, but I also understand this is that the average career span in the NFL is only 3 years, actually 3.3. So 3 years, 3 games, that's the average career span. So for example, if you have a guy like Philip Lindsay, which we all love to see run the football for the Broncos, the average career span for a running back is only 2.3 years. So Philip Lindsay been in the league for 2 years. 3 games is the average career for a running back. So you look at all those different factors and you look at how everybody foresees the way out of whatever situation you are, but to quick money in respects is by getting into the NFL, then there are so many different things that you have to highlight. These guys are truly here today and gone tomorrow. You look at the rosters and they flip over like flapjacks. They're always gone the next day. So it is very important to be able to bring that up and to highlight the importance of that to fans, because to be very honest, with the shut up and dribble type of deals as well, a lot of athletes aren't seen as human. They're just seen as robots, or as I like to say, avatars on the screen. Not people who have feelings, not people who are going through different things. They're just perform for me right now for my fantasy team or for my betting odds today so that I can get my fix while you take your millions or whatever money that you make and you move on from there.
So let's throw another question out here. And I actually think this is a really good one because, I mean, we're not just complaining here. I think we're also sort of talking about what people can do. And I think people are looking for answers, during this moment. So one question here is like, what can your white colleagues do to be better allies when it comes to diversity, whether it's, you know, sort of supporting your ideas for stories you want to do, or being true advocates for, you know, building a pipeline so that you can achieve greater diversity, pay equity? I mean, like, what do you think our white colleagues can do to be better allies on this issue of diversity? Anybody can take it first.
Be friends with us. Ask us to go to lunch with people. I mean, I don't have. I can easily assimilate everywhere I go because I grew up in an all-white prep high school. But for a lot of journalists of color, going into some of these newsrooms can be kind of jarring when you don't see anybody who looks like you, and at times it can come off as you being standoffish.
Yeah.
And that's something that I deal with even still. Nobody thinks I'm friendly. And I am, but I'm just quiet and I'm to myself. And if some people don't reach out to me, like, I might not think that they want to hang out with me, because we're going into not only like new newsrooms, completely new cities surrounded by completely new people. And then, like, you know, the backing your stories and stuff like that will follow, but it all can start with some coffee.
That's great. Micah.
This may sound harsh, but be willing to do some of the work yourself. I think far too often the burden of teaching and affirming falls on the shoulders of people of color, especially in the newsroom. So I would just say, be willing to do some of the work yourself. If you have a specific question or issue that you would like guidance on, I'm always happy to help. I just want to know that you tried to figure it out a little bit. And also, I'm not here to affirm your beliefs either. I'll try to clarify on that. You know, I've had a few people come to me just about different stories, and I've told them, hey, I don't think that's the best story. And then they want to tell me why they think it's a good story. And it's like, well, you came to me, did you want affirmation, or did you really want to know as a person of color what I thought? Because I've told you what I thought. I'm just not affirming what you wanted me to. So I think that would be my two biggest things. Try to do the work yourself. And if you do come, that's perfectly fine, but don't always look to the person of color for affirmation.
Good. Justin, you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is it's important to have inclusion. It's important for us to be in the conversation as well. But value our voice, and we're going to value yours as well. And the respect goes both ways as well. That's the one biggest thing that I do see. Allow us to have the avenue to be open, to speak. We've been hired for a reason. We're here for a reason. Allow us to have that avenue to say, this is an important story. It may not be important to you, but know that this is a truly important story that's affecting our community. So have an ear. I think the main thing is what is generally not done today anymore. Listen first and then speak.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like to speak, man. A lot of people like to tweet, but nobody likes to listen anymore. So please listen to us first, because we're going to listen to you. You know, you got two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Right. Use those ears, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if you guys could share with us a little bit about what your aspirations are for your careers. Like, what do you want? What do you want to do with your career? Where do you want to be? And do you see that career path? And if so, really briefly, what is it? Not necessarily where you are, but do you know how to get where you want to be?
With the caveat that you all love your jobs and your stations right now, and of course you'd never ever leave them.
Just in general, like, you know, do you want to be on ESPN, Justin, or do you want to be the head of Sports Illustrated, and do you know how to get there?
So let me say yes to all that. I'll be very direct. There's only been one black man who was called a Super Bowl, and that was Greg Gumbel in 2001. I'm looking to be number 2. There are 130 colleges, Division I colleges, and none of them are black. I'm looking to be one of those. Right now, I am working in local sports, and I enjoy it 100%. Playing games at Regis University allows me to continue to get those reps and play-by-play. been able to sign up with the Pac-12 network as well. And so actually, weirdly enough, right before the pandemic hit, I was supposed to call my first game for the Pac-12 network at University of Colorado. So it kind of stung a little bit. Yeah. But no, those are my goals. And I think that's the thing that you'll see with all of us is that we all have goals, we all have dreams, we all have aspirations, and the money at this moment may not be the best, but it's our passion that drives us. It's our passion to tell stories. It's our passion to maybe tell a different side of the story that drives us. And so for me, I know the Colorado Rockies, they haven't had a black man call a game yet. Why not me? And so those are the things that drive me. Do I know how to get there? Maybe not, but it's why you network. It's why you be able to talk to other people. And it's why you work on your own skills as well, because you never know who's that person out there who could build a bridge and help you get there.
Boy, that's interesting. Greg Gumbel's the only African-American to ever call a Super Bowl. Wow, you learn something every day. Tori, what about you?
Geez. I try to work in silence for my plans. Honestly, I mean, I just told you how shy I was. I don't want to be on television forever. Ultimately, my dream job is to like be a writer for SNL or like a late night talk show host. And mainly it's because I have to be so tight-lipped all the time. Like I have so many things I want to say all the time, but I can't. And like, that's the career I chose. But, you know, once I put my time in here, I hope that I could spend, you know, like my later middle age years in life being able to say whatever I want. Well, and right now I like to make people feel things. One day I want to be able to make people laugh and, you know, be witty with things that are still current event related. It's not really leaving news. It's just, you know, being snarky with news, I guess.
Who does that now that you admire? Who does that now?
I love Colbert. And that's not to say I love all of his like political jokes.
Yeah.
My feelings are not a representation of CBS 4. Yeah. I like his presentation. I think it's quick. I think it's always related to something that happened that day, which is still something I'm passionate about. Like I'm a news hound, but at the same time, I want to make fun of things too sometimes, but it's not always appropriate.
Of course not. Well, it's really interesting how other mediums like comedy, satire have really become sort of key to educating people about current events. Like, you know, well, I mean, Colbert, all of the late night comics, Trevor Noah in particular. I mean, they've become much more influential dispensers of, you know, the day's events. So, you know, that's still in the alley of news. So good luck with that. Micah, what about you?
My long-term goals and dreams, they just continue to evolve. I think they all have one trend though, and that's just longer form storytelling. I love being able to just really spend some time with the people I'm interviewing, whether it's just sitting with them and talking or, you know, following them around in their day-to-day life. What pains me the most is being under the gun constantly, being on that tight deadline. So, you know, in the future, I would just love more time and space to do longer stories. And eventually, years from now, I would love to get into documentary work.
Great. You know, when we get ready to end here, I'm going to ask you guys to sort of share one idea, you know, that you would like to leave the audience with when it comes to diversity or the importance of people of color being able to tell some of the stories that really mean a lot to our various communities. But before we get to that point, could you guys tell me one nice story that's not too long about a mentor or a sponsor that you have? Something interesting about your sponsor or your mentor. If you have one, and if you don't, tell me why you don't have one.
I'll start.
Oh, sorry,
oh no. You know what? I'm ladies first. My mama taught me.
No, I wanted to ask you. Want to know like just how we connected with them, or just about them in general?
Tell me how they've helped you. Tell me a story about how they've helped you.
You go ahead, Justin.
No, you go ahead, Micah.
Okay. My mentor is Tracy Potts. She is a reporter, correspondent for Early Today's Show and Today's Show. And she helped me early in my career. My very first job was in Johnson City, Tennessee, in East Tennessee. And I spent 3 years there. And I was very, very discouraged. And I was really down on myself. And I sent her my first reel of my work. And I was so nervous. And I remember her telling me, like, you are exactly where you need to be, but always you're exactly where you need to be. Don't try to jump over steps. Don't try to, move too fast. You are doing what you need to do. And then she did proceed to send me a very long email of things I could work on. But I think what I appreciated so much is this person who works for the Today Show, took time with little me to just really critique me, but also encourage me. And that changed. I mean, after that happened, a switch in my head flipped, and I gained just enough confidence to just keep going.
Where did you meet her?
She came to a community college in that little town, and she had a connection. She had worked in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she gave a talk just because she knew some professors at this college. And I went, and I stayed late. I let all the students go first because I wasn't a student, and I just wanted to say, hey, I really enjoyed your talk. And we talked for a long time, and she gave me her email. And since then, she has been an amazing mentor for me.
That's really a great little story. Tori?
Whew. There are a lot of people who work with me. I guess the first person who comes to mind would have to be Steve Schneider. He's the sports director at WAFB in Baton Rouge. I interned under him for 2 years in college in sports. And he spent so long trying to make me the sports reporter I thought I was going to be. And I wasn't. And there are no sports jobs. And I was applying, I was getting nothing. And I had like 2 weeks left before graduation. And I wasn't going to go home. So this man turns me into a news reporter anchor. He's been there for like 40 years. Like, he knows how to do everything. All of a sudden, like night and day, just works with me. And like, I would be like crying. I was so bad. I was about to like go back to college and get a whole new degree, but he kept pushing me. He wrote all of these recommendations. He did everything for me. And I finally got a job, and I still talk to him like often. Like my wallet got stolen in New Orleans in January, and who was the first person to help me? Steve. He's just always been in my back pocket, and he's never criticized me in a way that made me feel like this wasn't the job for me. He could phrase everything that was so constructive that just made me want to keep going. And I don't know if that's considered a mentor or a cheerleader, but I know I could do no wrong, and he'd still be watching the show.
That's great.
And he named my dog Maddie. And my dog is named in honor of Steve, my mentor.
That's great. Justin?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with two people. The first one will be Amani Ali. He was the president of the Colorado Association of Black Journalists, has been a mainstay in Colorado for many years, and recently has really helped me out as I've done kind of a double dip now. It's not only that I do, news anchoring, or rather sports anchoring and reporting. Now it's news anchoring and reporting. So it's the, I'm a cheery guy, and which is why I love sports. I love putting a smile on your face and moving from there. And it's a transition. And I know Tori and Micah could tell you, it's a transition to go from happy, chipper story to death and destruction. And news anchoring was really, it's a challenge, and I love being able to be in a challenge, but it really has been a challenge. So to have Amani Ali, to have Gloria Neal look at my work and say, hey, you've done a great job here, but you need to do A, B, C, D, and here has really helped out. And then, Greg, I'm going to put you out there. And I don't think you know, but we met 2016. And the reason why I say this, I'm not going to get emotional, so, but you don't know the impact that people may have. It's crazy I even know the date still. March 11, 2015 was the first time I was ever fired from a job. and I was fired at Channel 7 from, I was on the first iteration of the Now. And so I was doing everything on there, running the Steadicam, editing, the national photographer, all these different things, man. And so I did absolutely everything I could, and it didn't work out. And just to be able to meet with you helped me out and let me know that I could still do this. I foresaw myself at one point being on air, but I never thought it was actually going to happen. And so being able to get those phone calls from you, being able to eat lunch at the time, you know, we could actually sit down beside each other. Man, it was a blessing. But I think that's the thing that's important, is that we need individuals to pick us up. You know, a lot of times we have a minute 30, 2 minutes to tell our story and to move on. But we need people to pick us up as well. For us to get to the next place we want to go to, we need help as well. And so for yourself, for Amani Ali, Gloria Neal, I'm forever grateful.
Hey, man, thank you so much for saying that publicly. I really appreciate that. You're great. So we got about 6 minutes here.
Greg, I wanted to actually just jump in. Did any of the panelists have questions for Greg? Because Greg, you've got a lot of experience. I don't know if I'm going to flip the tables here, and I don't know if your panelists have any questions for Greg they want to ask Greg.
Is there anything that you've seen being covered, you know, during the protest that you would have told your reporters to be different?
You know, I think I would have probably spent a little bit more time with the Gen Zers and the millennials and talking to them about what else they wanted to do besides the actual demonstration, because I really believe we're watching leaders be born here. And I would have loved to have heard more of their voices about sort of their aspirations, because I think it would have helped people like myself figure out how we could help them more to get where they're going faster. You know, I was not thrilled by all the focus on people boarding up stores and the looting part, because that's easy to cover. I mean, it's low-hanging fruit. And I think it's, you know, it's what's wrong with the media, is that they do the easy stories. They don't do the hard stories. But where we've gotten to now, where systemic issues are being reported on, I think is exactly where we need to be. There was a story, I think it was in the New York Times yesterday, about environmental justice. I don't know if you saw the story about these Black folks who live right next to an environmental dump. And it took them generations to figure out that, you know, people and their families and their neighbors were getting cancers disproportionately and early in life and dying, and then trying to figure out what to do. And one of the most interesting things in the story was an examination about who controls the environmental movement, that very few people of color are involved in the environmental movement. Hardly any people of color lead the environmental movement. And it's those kinds of stories that get to the heart of what's structurally wrong with this country, is that there are a lot of people that purport to care about issues that disproportionately affect people of color, but people of color don't have a say in the leadership and the priorities that are set in these various movements. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be illuminated, and that can also be changed by the reporting that we do, and particularly people of color do. Good question.
I'm curious, Greg, just to follow up on that. You asked at the beginning of this, like, do you feel like we're in a moment that feels like this is actually going to deliver permanent change? And I'm curious what your response to that question would be.
You know, my response to that is I describe this as our Berlin Wall moment. That is that significant, and that, as I said earlier, the policies, practices, and symbols of racial supremacy, racism, racial inequity are coming down brick by brick. And I don't know, you know, if the wall comes down in a year or two or whatever, but I don't think it's going to remain. And that it's not just people of color who are demanding these changes, but it's a vast cross section of Americans, that multi-generational, multiracial, and that's what makes this movement so much different. As I was saying to somebody, I have heard, you know, the word racism, racist, structural racism, racial inequity more in the last 2 months than I have in 40 years. And that represents a tremendous fundamental shift, whereas as Professor Ibrahim Kendi has said, if we can have a common language to talk about this problem, we can make more progress. And I think right now we're starting to speak a common language. And every night on television, you can hear a white commentator talking about racism, structural racism, in ways that, like I said, I haven't heard in the last 40 years. So I'm very optimistic.
I think what I've been shocked, maybe surprised by is just the movement in public polling. I think that's just stunned me. Maybe it's just the era that we live in or what, but I'm curious. I think that's what surprised me the most is just how it appears like the people understanding, I think certainly the power of that video, of course, and just how horrific it was. It seems like that was a turning point, that the fact that people actually got, that people saw that it felt like the turning point. And then of course the response to it, the protests and everything. But I think that's what surprised me the most.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that, I mean, if you look at polling data over the last sort of maybe 10 years, I mean, there was a growing appetite for, quote unquote, the conversation, that there was a growing appetite to sort of discuss policing in America, how financial institutions were treating communities of color when it comes to redlining. But there was something about the George Floyd film, the video, and I liken it to the photographs in the 1960s when the kids were being attacked by the dogs during the civil rights movement. That was just a point too far. Like seeing that police officer callously, with his knee on that guy's neck, and he's screaming for his mama, his grandmama, and I can't breathe. And he didn't care. You wouldn't even do that to a dog. You wouldn't even do it to a dog. And I think at that point they just said, look, I can't deny what I'm seeing here, and I can't abide it either. And I think it was a turning point. It's as seminal a moment as when the dogs were attacking the kids during the civil rights movement. It lit a match that can't be extinguished.
Yeah, sorry, I had all these questions stored up, so we've only got a couple of minutes left. So
Micah, did you want to say something?
I say, it's kind of interesting because for me, like Ferguson is what changed it for me. And I mean, part of it is because I grew up in St. Louis, and I grew up less than 5 minutes from Ferguson, Missouri. But I think, like, even though I think it's really cool to observe what's happening now, I also think that's what infuriates certain communities of color, because it's like we've been here, this has been happening, and I think people are grateful that, George Floyd, that situation reignited this conversation. But I think especially in the Black community, it's just utter frustration, because for me, it was Michael Brown. For others, it was Trayvon Martin. That was something that we paid closely attention to. Tori, Florida, it's just, so it's interesting. I will say this time is different. It definitely feels different, and it feels like it's caught on, and now people want to know. And you're right. How many times have we heard systemic racism? And I mean, that's a term. I was talking to a DU history professor who said that used to be only used in academic circles, and now it's on the evening news every night. Right. So I guess that's all that I would add to it. But.
Anybody else have any closing comments?
Yeah, I think my last question, honestly, would be, Greg, you being the head of a newsroom, I'm thinking 6 months down the road, I'm thinking a year down the road, where history suggests that this will usually be tabled, and then kind of a 2 to 3 year cycle, it comes back up again. How do we keep the pressure on, in the sense of how do we walk into the newsrooms, and how do we continue on with our stories to tell different stories, but to also keep the flame going in the story? I'm talking about systematic racism or different deals like that. Like, how can we be able to do that?
So it's really a good question. We had one of our people who was observing this sent a note saying, how can we be allies? I think that, you know, we have to give feedback to these stations saying, look, I like that Walmart story, or I want to see more stories about this, that, and the other. And I'd like to see more people of color have opportunities on this station, okay, or at this newspaper. Like, I think, you know, as you were saying earlier, I think the community, the viewers have to demand, you know, a greater variety of storytelling, all right, that it can't just be sustained, you know, stories about, you know, crime or whatever, or policy, you know, what's happening in City Hall. Like, tell the stories of the people that live here, because that's what really defines a community. It's the people who live here. And, you know, it's not the burden of just one Black reporter or Latinx reporter to tell those stories. That, you know, if you want a rich mix of stories, you have to have a real diversity of talent to go out there and tell those stories. So that's one thing. And then I think the most important thing secondarily is to put our foot in the door and make sure that other people can come through it, and take away the excuse that, you know, I can't find anybody, because you can't find anybody if you're not looking for anybody. And I find that, you know, a lot of executives that run newsrooms, you know, they have a lot of other things that they're doing, trying to figure out stories and schedules and things like that. But if you incentivize them, that is tighter bonuses to, you know, achieving greater diversity of voices and presence on television, all of a sudden you get what you measure. You'd be amazed. If bonuses were tied to diversity, if metrics were tied to diversity, we'd see a lot. We see a lot of improvement in that area. So that's what I would say. Great question, and thanks for letting me get on my soapbox for a second. Dan, back to you. Thank you all too. We really appreciate your perspectives.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I know we're a couple minutes over, but this is a really, really great discussion. And thanks to Greg for moderating and sharing his insights. Micah, Tori, Justin for taking time out of your really busy, crazy TV news schedules too to do this. We really appreciate that. And you know, we hope to continue these discussions. So if anybody watching or any of our attendees have ideas for future discussions that you want to have along these lines or other things, please email me, president@denverpressclub.org. I'd love to keep the conversation going. And, you know, again, just we'll post a recording of this, I think in a couple days. But again, thank you so much for your time, and stay safe. And we hope to see you very soon. Thanks all.
Bye.
Hey, thank you.